So you have some friends who celebrate Pride, but you don't really know what it's all about or why or how you could help support or show encouragement without stepping on toes. These days it all seems so very political. Should you even bother trying? Well, this is my take on what we really should be doing in terms of celebrating our uniquenesses. Hello, my fellow DMs, GMs, gamers, game masters, creators, invigorators, inspirators, and respirators. Welcome to today's episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy, and today we step away from the practical guide, the series that we've been working through over the past few months, to look at this whole pride thing that seems to wash over the planet for the month of June, but mainly to look at it from the perspective of someone who just wants to get on with running their game, but also wants to be inclusive. Now, why do I want to even talk about this subject? Well, as a gay man, obviously pride is important to me and to my fiancée in terms of celebrating who and what we are, but at the same time, I was hired by a very large corporate company to run 2 sessions on how to be inclusive in the community from a role-playing and gaming perspective. Now, when I was hired to do this talk, I was like, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to talk about. Surely, if we are designing games, whether they are role-playing games or computer games, surely it's all pretty much the same thing. You need to include diverse characters. But what does that mean, and how do we actually do it? And how do we do it in such a way that it actually has meaning and it isn't just tick boxing? Wah! Interruption! Because this year's D&D in a Castle is running in September and October. I will be there running my games in October, in the middle of October, and at the end of October. That's right, 2 sessions, but it's 2 sessions only for the rest of the year. If you want to come and have the most mind-blowing D&D experience, where you are playing literally in a castle for 24 hours of 3 days of just insanity, head on over to the website and book your spot now. My tables are filling up. So come to England, experience amazing weather. Who cares about the weather? Come to England and roleplay, and let's kill some stuff and have some amazing adventures and just have an awesome time at D&D in a Castle, this week's sponsor. How are we actually inclusive? Well, on this channel, we use a thing called OGAS, the occupation, goal, attitude, and stake. Now, these are the fundamental building blocks of designing a character within your gaming space. Their occupation determines what they do, what they have access to, and most likely what they're going to be talking about. Their goal is what they want to achieve in the short term or in the long term, and they're going to try and achieve that depending on the stake. What is at stake? The amount at stake, so if it's a high stake, they will try and achieve that goal at all costs. If it's a low stake, well, they'll let that goal happen when it happens. And goals can be as mundane as wanting to go and get a sandwich from the local deli, or it could be as much as taking over the world. It really just depends on the NPC that you're making. And then A is the attitude at which they will approach their entire life existence. If they are listed as being grumpy, they'll be grumpy while they approach their goal and their occupation. That doesn't mean to say they're not going to be happy at some other time in their lives. It just is the general attitude that they have at the time. So I am going to add in another acronym, because that's what we need in our world, is we need an additional S. And that S is sexuality. Now, please again, separate the idea of sexuality from sex. Sex has, in my opinion, actually very little place in a standard role-playing game. I always fade to black when the 2 or 3 or group figures start getting naked. We don't need to do anything along those lines. That's for the imagination of the player. On the other hand, sexuality, which is what the entirety of Pride Month is all about, really is celebrating yourself for being who you are and whom you are attracted to or not attracted to, or just how you want to be happy in life. Well, that is a different story. So now, if I look at the table of sexualities that are available to me as a GM, I also have to look at the available sexualities on our own planet to realize that there are So many different permutations, it's insane. We know that there are animals that change their sex dependent on species density. Clownfish are the champion sex changers. If there's too many males, some of them will become females. Frogs do the same thing. It was the entire premise of Jurassic Park. So if you feel that sexuality has no place in your role-playing game, try and imagine Jurassic Park without it. You simply can't. It doesn't make sense. The dinosaurs cannot reproduce if they don't have that frog DNA that allows them to change their gender. So there's a good example, in my opinion, of taking the notion of sexuality and exploring it as an adventure. What happens if suddenly this all-female species suddenly can start making males? Or vice versa. What are the implications? Well, I beg your pardon, I'm so excited. There's an entire movie franchise that's, 30 years old based on that one little detail? Nonetheless, by adding in sexuality, what it means is that subconsciously you're going to be able to create these spaces that people feel comfortable in. It is an absolute joy, an absolute pleasure to be able to be someone who doesn't conform to the heteronormative model, which I know people fight against and say, why are we still talking about pride? Surely it's over. Well, we've been dealing with the heterosexual normative model for the past 20,000 years, so I feel that we're entitled to more than just a couple decades to talk about alternatives. Now, by having a sexuality in that OGAS, you are starting to look at your NPCs not just from an offhanded kind of my world perspective, but suddenly you're going, well, yes, okay, the blacksmith, and I always go to blacksmiths, let's choose somebody else. The barkeeper, for example, their occupation is to run their bar and to maybe do it well. That's their occupation. Their goal is to steal from the bar and not get caught because that's the kind of individual they are. Their attitude is fairly positive because they're currently stealing and getting away with it. The stake is fairly, I would say it's a moderate stake. Whether they steal today or they steal tomorrow, it's just nice extra spending money. Now I add in that little S for sexuality and I can look at the list of sexualities that are out there, and you can make your own lists. And I might say, actually, this particular barkeep, let's say that they're actually aromantic. They actually have very little sexual interest in other people, and that's where they're going to exist. That's their space. Does that change the character in any way in terms of how I'm going to run them? Subtly, it does. It means that when the PCs walk up to them and we have the young blonde elf who tries to then seduce the character, it's not going to work. That's not what they're interested in. That's not what they look for in potential partners. They're looking for something else. They're looking for a deeper connection that just is not there after having just met this elf who's walked in and now is trying to seduce them. On the other hand, if we had simply changed that S around to them being perhaps transgendered, then you go, well, now what is the appropriate response? If you don't know how these different sexualities are going to respond to a given situation, it means that you are simply out of touch with how other human beings operate, and there's a potential for you to go and explore and learn more. When I was doing this talk for this company, I realized I didn't know a lot of things about what other human beings take as being absolutely normal. I didn't have that perspective. I still don't have that perspective from some folks. I need to do more research. I need to learn more. Do I have to include that in every single NPC? Well, the answer is yes, because every single NPC, unless they have no reproductive processes whatsoever, will have some kind of sexuality. They will have some kind of process. Now, when you look at some kind of plant-based creature, for example, plants just release all of their pollen out into the air and it happens to land on the stamens or the flowers, the petals, or not the petals, the stamens, all of those wonderful plant terms, and it happens to reproduce. So there is no sexuality necessarily in a plant So when you're creating a plant-based species, why would they necessarily have a gender that's specific? So you can then portray these creatures as being non-gendered. They're not androgynous, that simply implies that they are the mix of both. They just don't have it. And occasionally they will simply spray out a great cloud of pollen. If that freaks you out, well, I suggest you don't walk outside ever again. By looking at this interesting topic, which all human beings do in one way, shape, form, or another, it enhances our storytelling capabilities. It makes our worlds feel different. And to be perfectly honest with you, if by simply including a little s into an equation and asking yourself how would that person react to the given situations based on that sexuality, and that is how you run your games, that is a gigantic, gigantic step forward to making sure that everyone at your table just feels a little bit more welcome, a little bit more at home, a little bit more at ease. And if that means they're having more fun at your game, then doesn't that mean that you're running a better game? I'm not going to continue preaching on this subject. That's where it is. I will say this, however. I am particularly tired and bored with individuals who feel that because I release these videos, they're allowed to disparage me or my personal existence. So if you feel inclined to want to write a giant comment on how everything is degenerate or is evil or doesn't belong here or that I'm trying to include politics in my games, you can fuck right off. And yes, that's what I said. It's my table, and I don't want that kind of human here. So you can go somewhere else. There are plenty of other channels that'll take you. And if you found this video inspirational, if you found it inspiring, or if for some reason you had something that you would like to add or disagree with, but in a civil and open way so that we can all learn from one another, please leave your comments down below and maybe even hit that like button or the subscribe button to show support for this, I think, rather interesting, if somewhat simple solution to being more inclusive in your games. Until next week, a massive thank you to you, a huge thank you to our sponsors, and of course, well, there's just no other way to say it. I wish you and yours the most happiest of gaming.